coming up soon. So this is a very relevant topic. Big shout out to Dusty Michael and the guys on his team for reaching out and asking us to host this and share some information about endurance racing with Apex Pro. So as I'm presenting and kind of going through the spiel, feel free to leave comments whenever you have thoughts, ask questions, and I will do my best to answer all of them. It shouldn't be a problem. So a couple of things when you get started and you're prepping for the race. First thing to really analyze and think about is how many hours is the race? What's the format? How many drivers do you have? How long are your stints going to be? So Champcar, you have a 2-hour maximum driver drive time in the car at a time. So you've got 2-hour stints. Also with Champcar, you've got 5-minute pit stops. Hey, Jeff Henderson. Good deal. Watching from the Florida Keys. Beautiful. Jealous. Awesome. So when you're looking at the Champcar format, and AER also has a minimum pit stop time. They have a 3-minute pit stop, I believe. Champcar has a 5-minute minimum pit stop time. That's going to give you some opportunity with using your Apex Pro and actually getting data in between stints is a lot easier with those formats. So that's the start. What's the format? How many drivers? And then how many Apex Pro units do we have? If you have more than one, you don't really need more than two. But if you have more than one Apex Pro device, the hardware piece, got a couple here. If you have more than one of these, that gives you another option. And I'll talk about what that option is. If you don't, that's not a big deal. You're just going to have to use your phone. So let's talk, before we talk about actually logging data, saving data, looking at data on pit lane, let's talk about the phone, because we know we have to have the phone in the car for the Apex Pro device. This device has no memory, capability to store the entire session file on the circuit board. There's not an SD card or a memory device inside of the unit. So we're going to be using the phone, which the big thing to look at with that is how many gigs is the memory on your phone. We know SD cards, right, the higher the storage volume, right, 128 gigs, those can write more data. So if you're using a 4K camera or a really serious action cam, you want a really, really high storage capacity SD card. Basically, the higher the storage capacity your phone has, the more likely it is to properly log data for a very long period of time because it can write more data files. We're sending data from the Apex Pro hardware to the phone every lap, every time the lap is timed, right? It's communicating some vital data points, and at the end of the session, it saves all of that. Well, if you have a 16 gig phone, even if you wipe it clear, you might not be able to write enough data fast enough after you get an hour or two worth of data. So really consider using a phone or an iPad or an iDevice of some sort that's got 64 gigs, 32 gigs at least, but ideally 64 gigabytes of storage space. I wouldn't worry about wiping the memory off the phone or getting rid of all your pictures and videos. The Apex session files themselves are not that large, but I would definitely make sure that you have other apps closed out. Any large files that you don't use, I would go ahead and get rid of. I've used a 16 and a 32 gig phone before and have been able to log 2 hours of data, no problem. So that's that on your phone. Make sure you got a phone that has reasonable storage capacity. You can find 128 gig or 64 gig iPhones, 6Ss or 7s on eBay for a reasonable amount of money. Dusty says, typically how long would a 64 gigabyte last? I don't really know exactly, Dusty. I would say several hours, 3 or 4 hours. But we'll talk about that because what we're going to be doing is either changing the device and the phone at a pit stop. If you're in Champcar, you have the flexibility to do that because you have 5 minutes. If you practice your pit stops, it probably takes you 2 or 3, unless you have somebody that's just not on the program. So that's not really going to be an issue because you can save the data and start a new session without disconnecting from the device or anything. That's easy. Just takes 2 taps on the phone, right? But I've also seen sessions with 200 laps. And I don't know how many gigs the phone was that recorded that, but obviously that's going to be, at a track with a 1.5 to 2 minute lap time. That's a ton of data. So Dusty, what I would do in your format, I'm assuming you have one Apex Pro. Is that correct? Got one device. It's pretty easy if you do. What I would do is mount the phone somewhere that's easily accessible during the pit stop. So either on a windshield mount, or I use a quad lock mount. I've used that before. It's on my phone case. You can actually get an adhesive quad lock piece that you put on the dash, and you just put your phone on it, and it's like a quarter turn or a half turn fastener, kind of like a Zeus, like little Zeus fastener, that goes on there. And so that'll secure the phone in place. You can wrap a zip tie around it or whatever. And then all you have to do is literally tap the stop, save, and then hit start again. And that will prevent you from having any data recording issues, Dusty. So that's what I would recommend. When you're done filling the car at each pit stop, just leave the phone and the Apex Pro in place. Have somebody that's either the guy that was helping the driver or the fire extinguisher guy or whoever's kind of checking the car, just have them stick their head in, pull a glove off, tap start and stop. In our car, we actually have the phone close enough to where I can do it in the driver's seat. So what I would do when I get in the car at a pit stop is I would just hit stop, save session, start. And that way you don't have a 14-hour data log, right? That's not going to allow you to have your data on pit lane unless you get under a red flag and you can email it or airdrop it or something. But that is going to get you time-coded data files for every stint. So every driver will have, you'll see 8 a.m. to 10 a.m., 10:01 a.m. to, noon. So you'll be able to tell which driver did which session pretty easily if you do it that way. I think that's probably the best solution for you, Dusty. Just specifically focus on where you mount the phone. So let's talk about phone mounting real quick. I've never had a problem with a race series having anything against suction mounts. Most of these larger suction mounts are 5-pound braking strength. And as long as the windshield's clean, it's very unlikely that they're going to lose their adhesion and their suction. This phone mount is actually not available yet, but we are working on continuing to develop this guy to replace the Ready Action phone mount that used to look like this. Some of you probably are running this guy. All right, we sold these for quite a while. They're not really making these anymore. So we've been trying to come up with a solution. That's why they've been out of stock on our website for months. This one is not readily available anywhere in the US. I don't even know enough about it to tell you what it is, but we're working on cobbling that together, piecing that together. I think it's going to be a really good solution. Another option is the Quadra lock suction mount. This is not a cheap option. This mount, I think, was $70. And it's not that great of a mount, to be honest. It's got the kind of sticky part on the suction mount. If you ever have to remove it and place it again, in my experience, it will not stick as well. I've been cleaning this with an alcohol wipe, and this will not stick to my windshield on my daily back and forth. But this mounting solution is really nice. It's just just looks like that, quad lock. And then you have a phone case, and you literally just line it up, right? Press and turn, and it locks it into place. And it's a really nice, like really, really firm, good mount. It's not going to go anywhere. If you have a big, heavy phone like I do, it's an iPhone 11 Pro, right? Big processor. It's pretty thick. The suction mount should be fine. But if you use the little mount that they have a little mount that just looks like this, and it has some adhesive, kind of like our 3M base plate adhesive, and you can like stick it on a flat surface. It's like for a wall, or it's real simple to use, but a really heavy phone will eventually start to peel that adhesive off. So just keep that in mind. I duct tape it as well as the adhesive on the actual mount itself. Bo, question. In what ways can you use data from Apex Pro to set a pace for endurance racing other than a set RPM limit or maybe an early brake marker? Telling someone to take it easy on equipment might not mean the same thing for every driver. Eric Meyer putting Bill Griffin's car off at turn 10 to Gingerman, or Robin Burnett's Mustang's brake pads going to the shims in 2 hours makes me think there's a lot to be learned from the G readings on how to preserve tires and brakes. That's a good question, Bo. I'll cover that after we finish kind of the logistics of the mounting and that sort of thing. So basically, how do you set some parameters for your drivers for not driving the car too hard? First thing is, I'm not sure if either of those cars were actually developed for endurance racing, because properly endurance racing developed cars shouldn't have those issues in the time that they're developed to run. That would be my first thought. I will get to that. Dusty says, when you stop start, do you have to have a strong data connection to get the session sent to the cloud? Is there opportunities for lost sessions that didn't get uploaded? Dusty, when you say that, opportunities for lost sessions that didn't get uploaded. So when you stop start, that's going to save the data locally to the phone. In order to save it to the cloud, you then have to tap data and tap the cloud icon to upload that to the cloud, which you could do during the pit stop if you have time. In which case you would need some cell signal. You don't need extremely strong cellular, but it's definitely going to help. If you have a really good cellular connection, at a lot of tracks you do. Some tracks you don't. VIR's got a pretty poor cell signal. Then that would be a struggle. But I would recommend just saving it locally to the phone until the race is over, and then saving it to the cloud, if that makes sense. So that's how you use one Apex Pro unit in the car for endurance data logging. If you have drivers who maybe another driver has their own Apex Pro unit they use for their own racing or track days, have them bring it. So now you have 2 units, right? Or if we had units on the shelf, I would rent you one. If you're already a customer, I'd be happy to rent you one for a weekend to use, because if you have 2, you now have another option. So what I do when we go endurance racing is I take a unit, I mount it on the dash in the place that I want it, usually somewhere kind of on the dash right in front of me, sometimes down close to the base of the windshield, somewhere that's within an arm's reach, right, of mounting. I mount it on the dash, right, get the base plate position there, and then I calibrate this unit for that position, then I remove it, right, and then I pick up my other unit, and I also calibrate it for that position. So now you have 2 units that are both calibrated for this position on the dash. So the next time you get in the car, the next time that unit's in that position, or the next time the unit is run, it's already going to be calibrated for that position. Does that make sense? So now you have 2 units calibrated for the same spot. So in this case, what I would do is, let's say I'm starting the race as the driver. Before the race, this is not a problem at all, right? I have my phone, I put it in the mount or my pocket. I usually run it in my pocket if I'm doing this, in my suit pocket, or I shove it next to myself in the seat. Something like that, something really simple, right? And I just press start 5 minutes before we go out on track, right? So now this unit is sending data to my phone, my personal phone that I have in my pocket or in the seat, or maybe the mount is really easy to use and I have it in the quad lock mount or the suction mount on the dash, right? That's going to make it more complicated at the pit stop though. Just remember that, right? So now I've got data logging on this device. When I'm done with my pit stop, what I do is I jump out of the car and I grab my unit off the base, stick it in my pocket, help the other driver get buckled in, right? Still following, my phone's still connected to my unit. The other driver takes their unit that they've already connected to, already chosen the track on, and are already logging data with, and they plug it onto the base plate. So now they've got their phone in their pocket, same format as me. So all that has to happen at the pit stop is for the driver getting out of the car to grab the unit off, and the driver getting in the car to put the unit on. The reason I like to do that is because now I have my data in pit lane in my pocket, right? It was that easy. I didn't get the benefit of using Lap Timer Plus and predictive timing on the phone screen that way. A lot of times some cars will have another, I've raced with other teams that already have another predictive timing display. And so that hasn't been as necessary. If you do need the Apex Pro predictive timing display, I would recommend running a quad lock mount or a mount that you could easily change at your pit stop. Again, if you're running Champcar and you have 5 minutes and you have a well-rehearsed pit stop, none of this is going to be a big deal because you'll probably have 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes to do this, right? And you can practice this. I'd recommend practicing whatever you're doing with your data logging, even if you've got another system that you're using. I know a lot of teams that run, other brands of systems, and they're pulling out SD cards at pit stops to pull data and video or whatever, and they're putting in another SD card. Well, in that case, they're actually practicing that with their pit stop as well. So same thing if you're using the Apex Pro solution. Michael says the 2-unit solution sounds really convenient. I like doing it that way because then I have my data on pit lane, and I find that I get more value out of, 1, the grip display on the unit, and 2, data to look at after my stint than I do from the predictive timer. I like the predictive timer, like if you're running WRL Fridays qualifying, that's when you want the predictive timer, right? Time is all that matters. In an endurance race, predictive timing, while a good tool to baseline yourself for your laps, just having a lap time display is usually sufficient for that. But also, I find that it encourages me to drive the car a little aggressively to try to get time, as opposed to pacing myself and getting through traffic efficiently. So that's up to you. I like the 2-unit system because then I can go back to what Bo was saying. I can sit on pit lane and I can look at my data, and I can very, very quickly and easily understand where there's time to be gained. And I can use that. In my case, what I'm usually doing is coaching the other drivers. So now when I'm on the radio, I know where I'm leaving time on the table. They're probably likely either doing something similar or, there's opportunity there. We can talk about that during a yellow flag, or I can coach them through a corner and give them something to think about, right? I really like the 2-unit system. So again, we are completely out of stock of units. I've covered this, I think, on the last Facebook Live. We're waiting on one component that we ordered 2 months ago, and we've since ordered 2 more orders of that same component. There's only one supplier that makes it, and they're not here. They're stuck in shipping limbo. So we don't have inventory on hand. Apex Pro dealers do. If you're either in the market for an Apex Pro or you want to pick up a second one for endurance racing, or maybe you can just talk one of your teammates into buying their own, because they probably need to buy their own anyway, right? Because they're going to use it when they go do events on their own. Have them buy a unit and bring it, right? And then you have the 2-unit setup, right? And that's probably going to be the most affordable way to get your data. Probably one of the most affordable options I know of to get your data on pit lane during an endurance race, right? In a format that you understand, right? I think that's really important. I'll post the dealer map on here if anybody's in the market for a device or a second device. Make sure that you have access to that. Yeah, Michael said post-race data review has become a ritual. I like being able to have my session as fresh as possible. Yeah, Michael, I do too. And my process for data review in an endurance race is, obviously get out of the car, help the new driver get in, take a deep breath, drink, a couple bottles of water, have a snack if you need it, let your body kind of cool down. And then I take some mental notes before I look at data. I try to think through any big mistakes that I made, like, ooh, I made a pass here that wasn't great, right? I might even write these things down. Oh man, I had a really good lap here and I was really consistent. A couple of things to pat myself on the back. I come up with a couple of those subjective, how'd the car feel? I make some notes on a notepad with that stuff. And then about 5 minutes after I've done that, I pull up the data and I'm going through my key performance indicators, right? And the data, the things I've already determined are where I need to be looking. Whether that's the speed trace, the G traces, the friction circle. I'm usually always looking straight at the friction circle to make sure I've got a good shape. I'm also looking through all my different laps and looking at the shape of the friction circle to validate any of the handling things I think the car has going on. Usually when I'm driving, I have a responsibility to help get the car working properly. And so that's a lot of times what I'm thinking about is how can I make the car work better for all of us? Our E36 M3 that I race in WRL has some pretty major understeer a lot of times. And so many times I'm using the data to validate what I feel and make sure that's correct before I go make a setup change. So there's a lot of different, things to look at. But to go back to Bo's question on using the data to set parameters, it depends on your situation, Bo. I mean, it depends on, one, is the car a developed endurance race car? as in, can you run a whole race on brake pads? Can you run a whole race on a set of tires? What's your fuel mileage like? Those are the biggest things to consider. I think, is the transmission fragile? Is the motor fragile? What are the weak points of the car? I would say that in most situations, if you have a weak transmission, but the car will last a whole race on brakes and tires, all you really want to worry about, don't handicap your driver on lap time, right? Because the transmission's weak. Coach them on shifting more, slowly. Coach them on third, neutral, fourth, right? Easy downshifts, open palm shifting, right? Proper hand placement on the gear shifter, that kind of stuff. Don't handicap them on lap time because the transmission is weak, right? If they're competent drivers that can manage that kind of feedback, you can still drive the car to its limit for the majority of the race. Most of these 200 treadwear tires that we race on now, Hankook RS4s, Dunlop Durezas, not the RE71, but the Falcon Azenas, these things on a fairly light car will last 10 or 12 hours, right? 14 hours. They'll last the whole race. The big thing I find on those is if you put 5 hard laps in and you get them really hot, they're like a street tire. You have to let them cool back off. They're not like a slick where they want to stay hot all the time. They're going to get hot pretty easily. So don't handicap your driver on lap time because of a car issue. Coach them on how to get the most out of the car with that issue. Because even in Champcar these days, you're not going to win the race most situations just off of attrition. If all your drivers are slow, you're probably not going to win on attrition anymore. 10 years ago, you probably would have. But that level now is so competitive. Still running a clean race, not hitting anybody, holding the car together is still going to be your number one priority. But right below that is going to be average stint time, all right, average stint length. You want your drivers to have a really good average stint length and a really good average lap time, right? Pull up the lap time spreadsheet that the series provides you afterwards, pull out any lap over a certain amount for yellow flag laps and average those lap times for the driver and give that to the driver as the metric, not your fastest lap time. Our team had the propensity to compete with one another on fastest lap time. So we would say, oh man, Jack did a 142 or did a 142.8. And everybody else would have to buy Jack beer, right? Because he did 142.8. Well, that doesn't really matter because maybe Paul did a 142.9, right? We're talking about 50, 60, 70 laps in most cases in these situations. So that's the feedback. And Bo, going back to that, one, don't handicap your driver because of a car issue. Coach them on how to drive the car fast with the issue. You still got to go fast. If the car's not properly set up for endurance racing, those are going to be the issues you have to drive around. The cars that you mentioned are big and heavy. So what I would look at to answer your question more specifically, Bo, let's take a more specific example here. Said Eric Meyer drove Bill's car off at turn 10 at Gingerman. I would just say that's Eric's fault, right? That's up to him. As a coach, the best way to prevent that kind of thing is to be in the radio. If you know that he's got red mist and he's pushing the car really hard, someone that he respects needs to be on the radio with him and needs to be giving him real-time audible feedback that says, hey man, you look good. Deep breaths for me. Calm down, right? Not for position, right? Car behind you is for position. Car ahead of you is for position. Car behind you is not. Whatever it is, super short radio communications. Calm down, right? Take a deep breath. Wiggle your fingertips. Super short 3-word commands. That's the best way to cool a driver down, in my opinion. And they need that, right? I don't really believe in a RPM limit necessarily. Set your rev limiter to be your RPM limit if you have that ability. If you don't have that ability, put a big piece of tape over the dash, right, on the tack. That's your RPM limit. Unless you're going to be pulling data logs and checking that stuff. Most drivers aren't going to. We had a 6,500 RPM self-imposed RPM limit last year for WRL. I shifted at 7,000 every single time, right? Every time I was in traffic. It hardly made any difference, That's the best way to protect the car. Don't ask the driver to do too much, right? Ask the driver to turn fast, clean laps, right? Make that their priority. If the car doesn't need to rev to 7,000, set the rev limiter lower if you have that ability. If you don't have that ability, consider finding a way to have that ability, right? Set the rev limiter where you need it. Running out of brakes in the Mustang. I assume the race is 4 hours, say you're going to shim in 2 hours. A lot of that's going to be track dependent. I assume that's at Gingerman. Probably a lot of on and off the brake pedal with hard stops. It's a heavy car. Big thing that before you even look into, we're trying to set up, all this goes back to in endurance racing, you're trying to set up the car to give the driver a car that they don't have to drive around, right? Let them go drive the car hard the whole time, right? Let them go drive the car at a pace that can win the race the whole time. That doesn't mean abusing the car. That means going fast. They're different things. You can go fast and abuse the car. You can go fast and not abuse the car. A lot of drivers go slow and abuse the car. So set up the car to take the abuse. Don't rely on the driver to treat it right, right? If you are a driver and you know what it's like being in that situation, you're not going to remember not to brake too hard when you're going into a corner 2 or 3 wide for position. Don't force that on yourself. That requires a super advanced part, of your brain to be able to interact and multitask. So the big thing I would look at, Bo, there is mechanically, is there a pad change you can do? Is it a brake cooling issue? Is there a mechanical problem that you can solve that's going to fix that issue? If you find out that's an issue mid-race and you need to adapt, it's going to be very hard to coach the driver and say, hey, don't achieve more than 0.75 G under braking. That's going to be a problem. The biggest thing that you can do there is remind them to get off the brake pedal, I think, for wearing brake pads. Most brake pad wear usually happens, in the trail braking phase where you're going slow, car is slower, there's not airflow, and the driver's still on the brake pedal. So if the driver has the tendency, Bo, to squeeze in brakes gingerly, add brake as they get into the corner, the opposite of what they should do, coach them to hard brake and release, hard brake and release. Stay in their ear about that. Release. Hey, get off the brakes, off brakes, off brakes, right? Remind them to start getting off that pedal as they get into the corner. 9 times out of 10, that's going to release most of your braking problems. The E36 M3 we race will go 2 or 3 14-hour races on brake pads, right? And 3 or 4 different drivers. No matter how you use, you can make them wear a little harder by doing that, but always try to fix the car mechanically as opposed to relying on the driver to do a certain thing within reason, right? If you have a driver that's, way out there that can't take care of the equipment, don't ask them to come back. Don't rely on the driver to do a whole lot. Dusty said, might have answered this already, but are there any issues leaving the Apex Pro plugged into power? Good question, Dusty. I have not answered that. You can plug it in, and I actually have some chargers here. So this is the charging cable that comes with the Apex Pro. It's a foot long. That's probably not going to cut it for your power supply. I would get a 3-foot long micro USB B, which looks like that. See if I can get it in focus, to USB. Right? And then plug that in either to a cigarette lighter or just wire it in, hardwire it into power, right? You've probably already got something. If you don't have a cigarette lighter in the car anymore, you probably have something you're already, running power to, whether it's to charge the phone that you're using for lap times, got a camera. There's already something else in the car that needs power, so plug it in. Yeah, I would totally recommend if you're running one Apex Pro, plug it in, let it go. Shouldn't have any problems. I wouldn't recommend running on the highest brightness setting just to keep the LEDs from being really hot. Let's see. If you're running 2 Apex Pros and you're swapping the driver changes, just charge it before you get in. It should be fine for the whole stint. If you want to take the extra effort to plug it in just as a redundancy, that's fine. Something else that's really important when you plug in either your cigarette lighter or your wired power source, make sure that the power is flowing from the power source. Make sure that you are getting power to your USB port. This guy lights up when it gets power, so it's easy to see. But just double check that. We had an issue at Barber where we had our GoPro and our Apex Pro running off of power from a cigarette lighter. And halfway through the race, the port just stopped getting power. The wires had a poor connection, and both of them died, and we couldn't figure it out. I got blamed for not charging the Apex Pro, and then we ended up finding out the power source was the blame. So check your power source on that. Make sure that you have power. So it's really a pretty simple process, but there are definitely some key things to know. And I've probably done 15 endurance races, maybe 20 with Apex Pro data at this point. So it's a proven process. But plug it into power if you're using one unit. Get a good phone mount. If you're using the phone as the display, I highly recommend that. But mount it somewhere the driver can reach it in case you need to save the data while you're in the car or while you're on pit lane or whatever that is. I think that's about it. Yeah, if you're using 2 units, calibrate both of the units on the mount where you're going to have it mounted in the car, so that when you get back in and you press start, the data is going to look good, right? If you don't calibrate it, it's not going to be good data. It's going to look kind of crazy. Check your phone memory. The more memory, the better. Not because it needs 8 gigs is enough to store tons of Apex Pro data, but it's not enough to write 2 hours of data onto the hard drive, right? Just like SD cards, you can't record 4K video on a GoPro with a 12 gigabyte SD card or 16 gig SD card. You got to have more ability to write data faster, right? Because I guess that's just how it works. I don't know too much about that. Good deal. After the session, when you have driver's data, you can swipe right over the session and rename the data file to the driver's name. So make sure that you're doing that if you're using the same device and same phone for all your drivers. At the end of the day, you can just go back through, look at your driver order, look at the times on the data logs, and just change the driver's name. And then you can airdrop or email those sessions to those drivers and look at it that night. Again, on pit lane, I do really like using 2 Apex Pros because then I have my data. Reach out to us, in a month or so. I don't know. I don't have an ETA on when we're going to have that component in to build our production run of circuit boards. There's a whole bunch of them right there waiting on one part. Thanks, COVID. But I'd be happy to rent you one, especially if you're already an Apex Pro customer. I'll give you a great rate, send you an Apex Pro for the weekend to use as your second Apex Pro for your endurance racing outlet. I have units set aside to do that sort of thing for demos and for rentals. So I'm happy to do it. If you don't own an Apex Pro yet, I'd be happy to rent you 2. It's just going to cost a little bit more. Opportunity cost is going to be higher there, but I'm happy to do that. Awesome. I hope this has been helpful information. I'll let this video live on the users group. I might see if I can post the recording to YouTube as well, so you can spread this out to anyone else that's running their Apex Pro. Again, stay posted soon. This phone mount right here, I'll do some features on it in the future. We're still doing some testing with it, but it's really cool. This is aluminum. It does get really hot, but it's got a really nice clamping system. It's all metal, right? It's really beefy. It's got a great suction mount. It's got some dampening in here. It's very universal. It clamps really, really effectively. Phone still vibrates. You're still going to get some vibration on the phone screen. I haven't found a way with a suction mount to make that go away. If you hard mount it to a roll bar or something, it's probably going to be a little bit better. I think that's all I've got on endurance racing, guys. I'll be at Road Atlanta this weekend with World Racing League, coaching for the KTB team ACP BMW 240IR team, and some drivers that are going to be taking on Road Atlanta for the first time. So very excited to do that. It's going to be a hot weekend. And then I'll be back in the car myself at VIR. So if you're running the Champcar 24 at VIR in August, I'll see you there. And then I'll be back at VIR in September with WRL. So lots of endurance races coming up. Hopefully I'll see some of you there. And I'm going to go ahead and jump off here. So thanks again, guys. Stay tuned for when we have inventory back. Again, give your local Apex Pro dealer some love if you need your second Apex Pro for endurance racing. And there's lots of cool stuff coming in the pipeline. Can't talk about it yet, but it's going to be cool. If you're a Lap Timer Plus subscriber, you'll be very happy. See you later.